Hello and welcome everyone to your week 7 lecture. Today we'll be investigating evidences in the context of reviews. So yes, these are your couple of slides. The most practical implication of what you'll be learning today is to understand how do you apply basic epidemiology principles and how do you undertake a review, particularly systematic review. That is what you'll be learning today. All right, so yes, these are your pre-readings as simple YouTube videos, so please do go through them. And we'll start from here. So firstly, what is the difference between original articles and your reviews, which is what this has been covered in week 2. With your original articles, they are original research, they are individual studies, whereas review, it is a compilation of various other research. So it is a secondary sort of work where you have existing research, you're taking it, and then you're synthesizing a summary, a critique of your own. All right, so it is not original research per se. And that is the difference between review versus original article. Now, the type of reviews which you have, they are narrative, scoping, systematic. And before undertaking meta-analysis, you certainly have to do systematic reviews first. All right, so systematic reviews and meta-analysis, they go hand in hand. If the researcher decides to do meta-analysis, that is up to them. And as it has been explained in your week 2 lecture, meta-analysis is when you're doing original statistical interpretations of the review data that you have collected. All right, so now these are your level of evidences, your National Health Medical Research Council, NHMRC level of evidence. And as you can see, the level 1 evidence is highlighted as having a systematic review or meta-analysis done of randomized controlled trials, because randomized controlled trials, as you know, they are the gold standard. And if you have meta-analysis systematic reviews of randomized controlled trials, they are considered as your level 1 evidence. Then if you have just say one properly designed randomized controlled trial and original article research, that is called as your level 2 evidence. Level 3 has 3 subsets. And basically over here, these are roughly speaking, well, quasi-experimental design, prospective cohort design, longitudinal design. All right. And in the level 3.1 and 2, both of them, they do have control groups, but these could be say non-randomized in nature. All right. And then with level 3.3, the main difference over here being that these may be single arm studies as well. It means, for example, you may have a very well designed, but just a pre-post intervention study design. Okay, so that could be the case. All right, or else you have parallel control group design, but yes, not necessary that you may have a control group in level evidence 3.3. Okay, so these are your level of evidence. The last one being the research, which is most predominantly done, which is your cross-sectional studies, for instance. Okay, and then you have the last one, which is based on clinical consensus. All right, so now, for instance, some clinical consensus is, for instance, you have a lot of clinical interpretation that you have seen this in your 35 years of practice, 40 years of practice. However, there is not sufficient research done to be classified as level of evidence. Okay, so this is the weakest form of evidence, which is called as clinical consensus, expert consensus. You generally learn Delphi group based on clinical and expert consensus, and then you may say establish or write a systematic review or a review article out of it. Okay, so yes, clinical consensus has the last one, but it is very, very useful when you're working in clinical settings, when you are dealing with patients on a one-to-one level basis. All right, so now basically it is, you have to study a research article thoroughly for you to classify it in which level of evidence does it belong. Okay, so basically there could be say some research articles which are sitting between level 3 and level 2. Okay, so this is how roughly speaking the level of evidences are. But there is no doubt, the main take-home summary message out of this is that there is no doubt that randomized controlled trial, they are your top level evidence. Okay, they are your evidence level 1. Okay. All right, so now going on to the type of reviews which you have. The type of reviews you have are, say, roughly speaking, and the ones which we will be covering today are narrative review, scoping review, and systematic review. So the main difference between narrative and scoping review is if you see, they are very similar in nature, but scoping review generally also includes gray literature, such as unpublished literature. For instance, it may include, say, previous doctorate thesis, PhD thesis, honors thesis, which are published, say, at a university level, meaning available if you, say, type the research topic, they will show up on, say, Google. This is a scientific piece of evidence, but it has not received scholarly publication. Okay, so scoping reviews do include gray literature. Both of the type of reviews, be it narrative or scoping review, they do not have great emphasis on critical appraisal. There is some emphasis on critical appraisal of the study design, statistical technique used, but it is not as much as you see in a systematic review. In systematic review, the critique is very, very strong in comparison to scoping and narrative reviews. All right, so basically what narrative reviews and scoping reviews do is they generally take the existing evidence and they summarize it for you. The critique part is not as strong, but in a systematic review, not only is the evidence summarized for you, but it is critiqued as well. All right, so there is scholarly critique done around the evidence which has been summarized. That is part of a systematic review. Okay, so that was the main, say, difference between them. And in scoping review, you will generally see the article, it is broken down in some form of themes. All right, so for example, if you have a scoping review on childhood obesity, the themes may be, say, for example, it may follow the Angelo framework of obesity in terms of, say, macro and micro environmental determinants of obesity. There would be, say, a theme, a story, a structure behind, say, writing of a scoping review. Narrative reviews, it could be more in terms of, say, summarizing individual research articles together. Okay, so now these are quite similar in nature, but one of the main difference in scoping review is that where you include the gray literature. In systematic review, as the term suggests, systematic, it is a highly systematic and a scientific approach. All right, it has a very rigorous and a robust approach, and that is the entire focus of today's lecture, helping you learn how to conduct a systematic review. And as I said, it is not just summarizing the existing literature, it is critiquing the existing literature as well. Okay. So yes, so now with your narrative review, this is all what I have said. So this is basically, I have just put this in a diagrammatic form for you. It is not anything new. So yes, as you can see in your narrative review, scoping review, quite similar in nature. Over here, as I said, there is very, very brief critique in both of these, narrative and scoping review. And in scoping review, there is more of a thematic structure behind the writing. Okay, whereas with the systematic process, you see there are numerous number of steps involved in conducting a systematic review, and we will be going through these in the next slide. Okay, so yes, now guys, there are roughly speaking 14 steps involved in undertaking a systematic review. This is not generally taught like this per se, but I thought this would be very useful for students, because especially after epidemiology, which is, say, the theoretical foundation for your research units, generally students end up taking a research degree. It could be, say, an honors degree or a semester-based research project, or else they could go into PhD. All right, at that time, the students struggle because generally the first initial publications that come out of research work, they are in terms of reviews where you want to synthesize what has been already done in the literature. Okay, and this forms the literature review component of your thesis. Okay, and generally when you have thesis by publication, for instance, your chapter 1 is nothing but a systematic review, okay, and which you want to aim for publication. So I thought it would be useful for you to have this structured guidelines around how to do a systematic review. So when you end up doing your research degrees, these PowerPoint slides can be a rough guidelines for you to take, at least know that which direction you have to proceed in. Okay, what are your starting points? Okay, so if you see these ones which are, say, purple in color, step 4, 5, 11, and 12, these are the steps which you are covering as part of your assignment, as part of your individual work assignment. Okay, so all of your assignment, your both quiz, they have been individual work. Your final assignment, which has 2 subsets, assignment part A and part B, all of this is individual work. But the steps which you're covering within this assignment, which is your part A and part B, it comprises these ones, step number 4, 5, 11, and 12. So you are doing components of a systematic review as part of your assignment. Now, please appreciate, students, that this undertaking all 14 steps of a systematic review is done when you're actually taking a proper research degree. As I said, this could be in form of an honors project. There are several honors students at University of Canberra who are doing nothing but a systematic review because it's a comprehensive piece of work. This is a high quality work that they are producing. All right, so an honors degree may equate to doing one comprehensive systematic review. PhD degree, the starting point of PhD degree are generally producing systematic reviews. If you're doing a research coursework, generally the type of subject which you do, for example, at University of Canberra, you may have a research planning unit in the first semester, and in the second semester, you may have research project. So within these 2 semesters, you are dividing up your undertaking of a systematic review. Okay, so this is done over a period of time. It would be quite unfair to push you to do an entire systematic review as part of your assignment because you will not produce quality. Okay, so for you to understand the steps overall is what is important, which is say part of this unit. Okay, and for you to have a practice, have a feel of doing certain steps of systematic review, that is the intention. Okay, so your assignment is very realistic. It has very real life application because you're literally doing specific steps which you would do anyways if you were to do a real life systematic review. Okay, so we will be going through each of these steps. Several of these steps are covered in detail in your tutorial week 6 and 7 video, where I explain to you how to undertake your assignment, because as I said, you are essentially doing parts of systematic reviews. All right, so I have explained certain steps in greater detail in that 3.5 hour video rather than over here. And which steps are those? They have been highlighted over here for you. Okay, so yes, your first one is identification of your research topic. How would you identify your research topic? This is a mutual consensus between you and your supervisor and what area of research you are pursuing. Okay, so for an example purpose, for instance, I have taken over here, your research topic could be association between oral vitamin D supplementation and serum vitamin D levels and birthing outcomes. Okay, and vitamin D deficient pregnant women. Now, what are the IVs and DVs in this research topic? That is for you to investigate, but I will be showing you the answers in a couple of slides coming next. All right. Okay, now you have step number 2, which is searching for the registered systematic review. So first, before you start doing a systematic review, it is very important for you to identify, has anybody else already done a systematic review on this topic? If they have already done it, then you do not have to waste time in doing the same systematic review because you're not adding in anything new. Yes, if somebody has done a systematic review on this topic, but if you have a gap in the literature which you're trying to complete, for example, this is the example which I had taken in the week 6 and week 7 tutorial video, whereas you may have a lot of research on type 2 diabetes within the Caucasian population, but nothing which is there specifically among the, say, I think it was the Pacific Islander population. So Pacific Islander population living in Australia. So that is a unique edge which you are adding, contributing to an existing gap in the literature. And yes, you are very well justified to do a systematic review on this topic. All right. So how do you know if somebody has already done a systematic review on this topic? High quality systematic review are always registered. Their protocols are always registered. Where do they register it? They register it with Prospero, or else you may have the Joanna Briggs Institute. Okay, so these are the 2 main websites which you should check out before starting a systematic review on a particular topic, because good quality systematic review are always registered. So I have 3 students right now who are undertaking systematic review with me. One is my own PhD student. The second one is a postdoc which we have in our team. And the third one are my Masters of Nutrition and Dietetics students. So all 3 of them have registered their systematic review with Prospero. All right, so Prospero is a free application, and that is the one I generally use for registration because it is quick, it's very intuitive, and you are doing a Prospero application, say a mock Prospero application as part of your assignment as well. Okay, so yes, that is the first thing which you do. You find a topic interesting. In collaboration with your supervisor, there is, you want to see whether it is registered or it has already been registered or taken up by somebody else across the globe. Okay, so Prospero application and Joanna Briggs, why are they good? Because if anybody else in the world is doing this topic, you will get to know about it. Okay, so yes, these are the two good sources to search. And thirdly, it is always good to have an informal search on scientific databases to see if there are any systematic reviews which were not registered in Prospero or Joanna Briggs, but they have still been published elsewhere. All right. So it's good to have the third informal search. That is part of my best practice. I always do that, but I make sure that once I'm confident that this topic has not done previously, I do a formal registration with Prospero and my students do the same thing. Okay, so nobody else can take up that topic for the specific time period that you have mentioned. If you have told Prospero that give me 3 years for to synthesize this information, compile and publish this information, after 3 years, somebody else has the right to take up your topic. Okay, so basically this is what your Prospero application is. First, identify if somebody else has done the topic, register your topic. Okay, now I'm telling you the IVs, DVs, the question which I had asked you in a slide above, which is if you have a topic in your mind, first break down the topic in PICO table format. Okay, so what is PICO? It is your patient or your population intervention comparison outcome. Okay, that is the abbreviation for PICO. Now, in terms of your patient, what is the patient population or your participant population you're looking at? You're looking at pregnant women who have vitamin D deficiency. That is your target population. Your intervention, oral vitamin D supplements. You want to see the impact of oral vitamin D supplements. So that is your IV. Okay. What is your DV? Your DV, for instance, over here is the outcome. Your outcome over here is this, which is the impact of oral vitamin D supplementation on your blood serum levels and on birthing outcomes. And your birthing outcomes of two types, meaning the prevalence of C-section and vaginal delivery. Okay, so you have two of these dependent variable in this example. Your control group could be research studies who have given vitamin D supplementation to one group and they have given no supplementation to the other group. If you choose to widen your research topic, then you may have studies which only has a intervention group. All right. So now if they only have an intervention group, okay, so it's a quasi experimental design, but it is one group pre-post. Okay. It doesn't have a control arm. All right. It doesn't even have a parallel control arm. All right. So which is not part of your study, but you may have a parallel control arm. For instance, guys, what is a parallel control arm? Let me just come to this page. You see this parallel control group. So for instance, in my PhD study, I was looking at Indian children who were there in Australia, who were there in India. Okay, so I had these two groups which I was examining. Now, what is my parallel control arm? My parallel control arm is a Caucasian data set on which child feeding practices were examined, which was my main variable of interest. This was not part of my study. The Caucasian group was not part of my study, but I compared my baseline characteristics to this group and I used it as a proxy control group. Okay, so this is called as a parallel control group where you could have a proxy control group as well. So that makes up your level 3 evidence. Okay, so now over here, for example, if you just have quasi pre-post one group design, this would be classified as a level 4 evidence. Okay, but if you do have a proxy parallel control group, it could be your level 3 evidence. So it depends upon your inclusion criteria, what type of studies you are including as part of your systematic review. So if I were to do the systematic review and let's say hypothetically speaking, not many systematic reviews are done on this topic, I wouldn't be very picky about throwing out other studies. I would be including quasi-experimental design, RCT, and I would be including one group pre-post design. So I'll be looking at an array of level of evidence rather than just focusing on level 1 evidence. Okay, you have to go wider, you have to go broader if there is not much done within your area of research. Okay, because you do not want to leave out information which has not been synthesized, compiled, and critiqued earlier on. Okay, and maybe you are one of the pioneers who's doing this in this space. Okay, so that's why first you always break down your topic into a PICO table format. All right, this gives you a clear idea as to what your variables are and what is it that you have to investigate when you start finding articles in the literature. Okay, then you have, again, your step 3 would be further is to develop your research questions. Okay, so now how do you develop your research questions or your research objectives? So basically, you can have either objectives or questions. Some students, for example, when I have my students, I tell them to frame both things, objectives and questions, because it depends upon how the student best understands and what is the learning. Okay, so over here, I have just given you examples in form of research questions. So what I want to investigate from the literature is, does vitamin D supplementation, which is my IV, all right, so does vitamin D supplementation improve the serum vitamin D level, which is your blood vitamin D level? That's my first research question. Second question is vitamin D level, vitamin D supplementation and its association with the outcomes such as C-section. Then vitamin D supplementation and its association with outcomes such as vaginal birth. All right. So yes, I have 3 of these research questions which I want to investigate. Always remember, your research question should be specific and analyzable. Okay, meaning specific, meaning yes, they are very specific. They have an IV, they have a DV, they have a target group. Analyzable, meaning they are quantifiable. Okay, so when I do a systematic review, I will know what is the XYZ dosage of supplementation and what is the level of change in the serum vitamin D level. So yes, your analyzable component should be measurable. Okay, so that's why roughly speaking, you can say that your research questions or objectives should be smart in nature. Okay, you should learn how to develop smart objectives. All right, so now I'll stop over here because how to teach you to develop smart objective, that comes more in research methods sort of a unit. But this gives you an overall idea as to what is the next step which you have to do out of a PICO format. Develop your research question or develop your research objective, because your PICO is essentially nothing but your overarching research aim. Okay, so within the canopy of your research aim, you have these 3 specific research objectives or research questions. Okay. Now guys, just as I have done in your week 6 and 7 tutorial, I have given you several examples of how to develop inclusion and exclusion criteria. So I had a different example from my PhD thesis in your say tutorial PowerPoint slide. I have a different example over here. So now this is inclusion exclusion criteria from current research that has been undertaken by my student who's actually doing a systematic review. Okay, so this is another example which I have added over here for you to understand how do you frame your inclusion and exclusion criteria. And if you see, for your benefit, I have added in one more example of inclusion and exclusion criteria, which is based upon the question we covered in your week 6 and week 7 tutorial, okay, which is looking at Pacific Islander population and type 2 diabetes intervention. Okay, so I have formulated, say, 3 sets of examples of inclusion and exclusion criteria to give you a good understanding of how you should be developing the same. So if I take the example which was included in your tutorial, the inclusion criteria, is roughly speaking, should be Pacific Islander population living in Australia. All right, now you need to give a rationale, and this rationale is what was explained to you in the tutorial. Okay, meaning why are you trying to focus on Pacific Islander population living in Australia? Firstly, because there is no existing evidence in this space, or there is very, very limited evidence, and maybe nobody has done a systematic review. There are a few scoping reviews or narrative reviews, non-systematic reviews, or there are a few original articles, but nobody has compiled this into a review. All right, and majority of the work is done within the Caucasian setting. So this is the kind of rationale you need to write with references when you are designing your inclusion criteria. The second one being adults with type 2 diabetes, no comorbidity. All right, so over here, for instance, your rationale is that why you do not want any comorbidity, because as this may impact HbA1c levels. So if an individual has CVD plus diabetes plus hypertension, all of these comorbidities or metabolic syndrome, for instance, this all factors together will impact that HbA1c level. And that's why you want adults with type 2 diabetes within the intervention which do not have any comorbidities. Or else, if you are good with statistics, you may say where comorbidities are adjusted for. Okay, if they haven't adjusted for comorbidities in their statistical modeling, then that would be questionable, because you would think that, is it that say there was no change in the control group because of comorbidity, or maybe the intervention did not work because of comorbidity. So then you have these research gaps which you do not want, and therefore you would control for comorbidities. Okay, then articles only in English, and then articles from the year 2000. Okay, so now again the rationale which I had taught in the tutorial, which is what may be the rationale for this. It could be that interventions, they started focusing on the Pacific Islander population only since the last decade. Okay, and you may have the references for the same. You may have the very early, the very first intervention which was published in the area of Pacific Islanders and type 2 diabetes to show that this was the very first evidence published out there, and this is only 10 years back. Okay, and that's why you're focusing on the last decade. Does that make sense? Okay, so these are the type, this is how you would be designing your inclusion criteria. Then interventions which you're trying to look at is diet, physical activity, or else the combination of diet and physical activity. All right, so you are not looking at anything else. So your exclusion would be any studies which are not examining Pacific Islander population, interventions which are other than diet and physical activity. For example, if they have a cognitive behavior therapy or a psychosocial approach, you may not include those studies. All right, so then the other one, now see, these are hypothetical. If you want to include those studies, that's completely up to you, but these are hypothetical examples. Okay, then you have interventions which are outside of Australian setting, which is not what you want, because your target is very narrow and focused, which is Pacific Islander population, but living in Australia. All right, articles that are not in English, all of these would become your exclusion criteria. Okay, so yes, guys, in total now you have 3 sets of examples on how to frame your inclusions and exclusion criteria. All right. Then you would be, say, formally registering your protocol. Once you have your research question design, inclusion, exclusion criteria design, that is when you will be registering your protocol. Why? Because you need all of this information in writing out your Prospero application. Okay, so your Prospero application asks about all of these things, and therefore you need to do all of this homework before you register your protocol. Okay, so yes, then you would go about registering your protocol once you have this information figured out. All right, and as I said, my practice is to use Prospero, but you can look into the other option as well if that is something which is decided between yourself and the supervisor. Now this is the Covidence. So basically now what you would be doing is you do the article screening process in a software, in a type of software, okay, which supports you with the article screening process of the abstract and of the full text. Okay, so there are 2 things in article screening. First, you screen the abstract, and if the abstract you feel is meeting your inclusion and exclusion criteria, it is meeting your, say, your research topic, then you take the article, it is accepted, and then once the abstract cleaning is done or the abstract identification is done, then you take those articles and you read the full text of those articles. After reading the full text of the article, you may realize that, no, hang on, these couple of articles, their abstract felt like they were meeting my objective, but their study has done something completely different, and this is not meeting my objective, all right, or my research question. Therefore, you would be removing it out. So there are 2 steps in, say, article screening. One is, the first one you start is you're screening the title and the abstract. The second one you start do is your full text screening. All right, the software which we use at University of Canberra is Covidence, because we have a subscription to Covidence, and therefore the students can freely use Covidence. Okay, and you have another one which is called as Ryan. I haven't used Ryan, and similarly I use Prospero application. I haven't used Joanna Briggs, but I know these are the other screening software available out there, and that is something for you to investigate. Okay, so yes, so now ideally guys, a systematic review screening process is done ideally by two researchers, and it's a blinded process. So you do your own search and your peer does the another search, okay, and then you compare the articles which were similar, both of you found the same articles, okay, and you thought of including them. Then you have a contrast, meaning you thought of including XYZ article, but the other peer researcher thought that no, these articles shouldn't be included. So these are your points of discrepancy. Then you have a third reviewer come in, and then he or she will resolve the discrepancy. Sometimes you have a third and a fourth reviewer resolve the discrepancy. Okay, so this is generally done where we have students who do the blinded review process of article selection and screening. Once they have done the abstract title screening, then we would be coming in, myself and my co-supervisor, and looking at what they have done and resolving the discrepancy where both of us may feel that yes, these articles should be included or not, the ones which have this discrepancy. And then the same thing would be done with full text screening. The first researcher, junior researcher will come together. They will do the screening process. The ones which are common, great. The ones which have discrepancy, those will be resolved by a third and or a fourth reviewer. Okay, so this is basically the say review process, article screening process, which is done using a Covidence software. With recent publication, more and more publication and journals are emphasizing that you use a systematic software such as Covidence in your article screening process. Okay, previously this was just done on an Excel sheet. So many articles included, so many excluded, and the discrepancies. But now you have proper software to channelize this entire process. Okay, so you have less manual error. All right, so guys, this is how your Covidence looks. This is just an FYI for you that this is how it looks. So for instance, you have the first stage where 735 duplicates are removed. Then title and abstract screening is done for 835 studies. Okay, so they found that 835 studies were irrelevant. Full text studies 27 were excluded. Okay, the extraction is 90 studies were extracted. All right, and then basically, yes, then you have the review process start where you have the third reviewers come in and look whether what you have done in terms of discrepancies and how best to resolve them. Okay, so basically, I always tell my students that whenever you have discrepancies, one of the biggest hint which I give them, go back to your inclusion and exclusion criteria. You should have it like stuck somewhere on your wall, especially when you're doing a systematic review. Whenever in doubt, go back to your inclusion exclusion criteria, go back to your research question. Does the article meet your research question and your inclusion exclusion criteria? A lot of time discrepancies are resolved using these two formats. Okay, so this is something, a hint which can help you out. All right. Okay. So now you have article title and abstract screening. So as I said, firstly, search the article on scientific databases. All right, then you will be finding full text of the article. So the first step is just article title and abstract screening. Then the second one is you screen for the full text. And then how do you find the articles is using keywords. We will be looking at that process and then adding the references. Okay, so basically in Covidence, you can add the full text. Okay, and but I always tell the students, do make a copy in EndNote as well. Why? Because EndNote is a very, very important tool which will help you with the final in-text references and the bibliography. All right, so that's why the references, full text articles can be saved in Covidence and should be saved in Covidence, but you should always make a note of these even in EndNote. All right, so yes, so basically I'll be giving you few quick tips on article screening. And when I have taught students these tips, their article screening time has been reduced on an average from 10 minutes to 3 minutes. So 10 minutes per article, now they take generally say 3 minutes per article. And with practice, you may just need say 1.5 minutes per article. Okay, so this is done. These tips are very useful when you're doing the title and abstract screening. Okay, so they are useful at that stage. All right, so yep, so moving forward. So yes, where would you screen for your articles? So where do you start searching for your articles? Okay, so firstly, you now have your research aim. You now have your research question. You know what your IV and DV are. Okay, so now you have to start searching for research articles. Okay, what are the database you use to start searching for research articles? Well, in the area of nutrition and dietetics or generally health science, these are the ones which we use most commonly. Okay, and of course, we also use Science Direct because I do use that commonly as well. Okay, but basically these are the ones which I use. If you are very, very new with research and this is your very first time you're taking baby steps, start with Google Scholar. Google Scholar is pretty simple, intuitive. Once you get confident with Google Scholar, then you can use more sophisticated and robust databases. The best practice I always suggest to my students is do not just rely on one database, because you have database who subscribe to X specific number of journals. Okay, so for instance, if they haven't subscribed to say ABC journal, but they have subscribed to XYZ journal, you're missing out on research articles which may be published in ABC journals. Okay, so always have a permutation and combination of at least 5 to 6 databases for an exhaustive search. Okay, and this should be followed by both of your reviewers, meaning the junior researcher A and B. Okay, and guys, basically whatever I have said, I have written it over here because as I said, this is an online lecture, so it's an advantage for you. But when I used to take face-to-face lecture and if they were not recorded, then this would help the students out. Okay, so yes, now where do you find full text research articles? So as I said, the first step is you found the abstract and the title to be interesting. You felt this is a useful article. And now you have done your abstract and title screening, but now you have to investigate the full text of the article. Okay, so now where will you identify full text of these articles? Well, you can find full text of the article using the UC Library article search database. If you're already working in an organization, health organization like hospitals, they have their own database search where they can give you full text articles for free. So basically it is the library, University of Canberra Library. They have subscribed to XYZ journals and therefore they have full text articles available free of cost. Okay, so then it's not a cost which is incurred on you. All right, if the article, if by the UC Library article search, you do not have the full text article available, then you can request the article to the UC Library and they can get the full text for you. Okay, so these are the links for the same. All right, and then for instance, if nothing works, if you have friends who are working at various other universities, at big universities, then like say even in US and UK, you can ask them to get a couple of articles for you. Okay, so yes, there are various informal and formal way of doing it, but the first best practice is to go to your own organization's database and get as many full text articles as possible. All right, and I'll just show this to you. In this footnote on the slide 16 for Covidence, there is a video recording which I have shared with you, which teaches you how to use Covidence. Okay, so this was done by University of Canberra for researchers to teach them how to use Covidence. And hopefully this would be, you can access this link even now, but I'm not sure. This recording was done some time back at University of Canberra, but if it is working, this can be an additional learning resource for you on understanding how do you use Covidence. Okay, so I just remembered this, so I thought I'll highlight this for you. Okay, so yep, now, okay, so yep, these are the various ways of sourcing full text for your research articles. And yes, if you are in doubt, especially if you are a University of Canberra student, then please go to the library, because there are research librarians within each faculty, and your research librarians can guide you thoroughly through the entire process of how do you search for full text of specific research article. All right, so research librarians are very, very useful resources for you to gain further guidance into this process. Okay. All right, so now where do you identify keywords? Okay, so now the best, if you are very, very early career budding researchers, the most easiest place for you to identify keywords, because see, when you start searching for research articles on databases, the first thing which you have to do is you have to enter keywords, right? So when you are entering keywords, where do you how do you make these right keywords? So if you are very early career researcher and if this is the very first time for you, the keywords are generally present in the title. Okay, so these are extra hints. So look at the title, and the title should be, say, similar to what you're searching for. If I'm searching for, say, vitamin D, say vitamin D deficiency, pregnancy, and birthing outcomes, these are my 3 keywords, for example. Okay, so similarly, this is just an example which I have given over here of some other research article. If my, say, if my research was in the area of obesity, sugar sweetened beverages, and sugar tax, those would be my keywords. So those keywords you can, say, source out of a research title. Okay, the title of the manuscript, you can have your keywords from that. You have several keywords which are, say, compiled by the researcher in the manuscript that they have published. Almost all, not all, but almost all research article, full text manuscript will have keywords written inside. All right, so those can be your additional keywords. So you know, if you type these keywords, you're highly likely to find other similar sort of articles. Okay. All right, so yep, this is, as I said, the entire thing which I said, but I have written it down for students where I was teaching at another place, but it was not recorded. Okay, so yes, now the other place, another hint of where you may have keywords written is, say, in your aim or your or the objective of what the research paper is trying to establish. So you found one research paper which is very, very relevant for your systematic review, and you want to find similar such papers. To find similar such papers, first, as I said, look at the title, write down the keywords, look at the keywords which are generated by the author, write those down, then look at the last paragraph of your introduction or your background. So the first thing which a publication has or a manuscript has, it has the introduction or the background section. So now within this section, the very last paragraph generally will have the aims and objectives of the research paper. This will give you your additional keywords, because the aims and objectives of the paper will carry the gold keywords, which will help you to search for similar other articles. Okay, so these are other places where you can have other keywords which can give you more articles within your area of research. Okay, so as I said, guys, this all is not taught generally, but these are hints which I have learned and compiled throughout my years of research, and hopefully they will be beneficial for you as well. Okay, so you have the same thing written for you. All right, then the other way of generating keywords is think of synonyms. All right, so now I'll be telling you an example from my PhD research, but let's take a word like obesity, which is easier for everybody to understand. So synonyms of obesity, which you may find in other research articles, could be, say, overweight, obese, adiposity, childhood obesity, weight status. So basically you have to use all of these different sort of keywords when you're searching for your research article. Okay, so don't just say stick to obesity, use various such synonyms so that you are sure that you're not leaving any research paper out there which is within your area of research. Okay, that's why you develop synonyms. That's why you think of synonyms. Okay, then you make various permutations and combinations to get the right sort of research articles. So for example, you use permutation combination, simple words which are and, or, and not. Okay, so for example, child feeding practices and obesity and Indians, because these are the type of research articles I wanted in my PhD study, which is child feeding practices, obesity and Indians. Okay, now as I said, I'm extending my research work from my doctorate study, but it is not looking at Indians. It is looking at the wider Australian population. So child feeding practices and obesity and Australian, I would say, or Australian children, I would say. Okay, or else I will not write Australian. I'll just see if there is any data out there on this space. Okay, so it depends upon these kind of things. Okay, then I would say child feeding practices, not breastfeeding. Now, why is this important for me to write not? Because when I just used to put child feeding practices and obesity, I used to get a lot of research articles which the database is perceiving child feeding practices to also include breastfeeding. But I'm not researching in breastfeeding. I'm researching into the actual complementary feeding activities of a child. All right, so it does not include breastfeeding. So I had to write not breastfeeding. Okay, so finally my thing could be like this: child feeding or feeding practices and South Asians and obesity and children not breastfeeding. Okay, so if you have these permutations combination, you are more likely to get more specific articles. Sometimes it may so happen, guys, the more, and this is just based upon experience, if you have very complicated permutation combination, you may only end up with 5 articles. Okay, so you have to have themes of your search words. Okay, so first theme of my search word would be child feeding practices, not breastfeeding, and obesity. The other would be more ethnic nature theme, which is child feeding practices, obesity, and Indians. Okay, so basically I then, that is from my experiences, what I do, I theme out my search words and then I run searches, which gives me better results than writing so many population combination that the database is completely jammed and confused and it just gives me 2 articles. Okay, so which is not realistic. All right, so when you theme out your searches, this will be better for you. Okay, all right. Okay, and the other tips, the final tips which I have, which will help you with your searches, is use truncations. Okay, so for example, if you use truncation for obesity, anything which is say close to obesity, such as obese, obesity, weight status, child weight, overweight, your database will consider all of these words comprehensively. All right, and if this becomes very complicated for you and you are not sure if you're doing the right thing and if you have missed out any articles, this is an example which I have taken from Google Scholar, is click on these things cited by 22 people. Generally, not always, but generally when you click on this, the other 22 people who have cited this research article will be citing this research article only because they are doing research in a similar space. So at least 3 out of these 22 articles will be very close to what you are researching, and they will be helpful to add in your database collection. Okay, and then look at this related article tab as well. Why? Because the database will try to give you all of the other research articles which are very similar in nature to this one, which is very close to what you're investigating. Okay, so now guys, these kind of things cited by related articles, these kind of things are there in all databases, but they are not always there in this format. Okay, so they may be in different places on the website. You just have to look into it. All right. So yes, and also you can specify article type. For example, PDF article, PPT, doc, etc. Why? Because certain governmental documents, for example, that is a kind of search which I run. I do, if I have to go on Google Scholar, because governmental documents, they are publicly available documents most of the time, not always. And you can just get it on Google. You don't even have to go to databases. Generally, databases will not hold governmental documents. They hold more published articles. Governmental documents are available more on, say, databases like just simple Google. Okay, so when I use PDF, child feeding practices in Australia, this gives me a lot of governmental documents and guidelines which are published in this space. Okay, so that is one more way of running your search. All right, so the same things I have written over here for you. All right. Okay, so now the last thing, as I said, that yes, please add your full text articles in your Covidence, but do make a EndNote file as well, because EndNote file will help you with your in-text citation. You cannot use Covidence software for your in-text citation. Okay, so when you actually start synthesizing and writing your literature review, you will be needing your EndNote software. Okay, so it will be helpful for in-text citation, so on and so forth. So yes, EndNote software is freely available to download for University of Canberra student, and it's a lifetime download. You download it once, it is there on your laptops forever. Okay, so that is something which you can make advantage of, even if you are doing a certificate course and if you're not, say, doing a proper full-time degree over here. All right, so that is something which you can investigate with the librarian if that services are allowed for the online cohort taking this unit. But yes, and the library also offers free consultation sessions, online workshops on understanding and teaching you how to run EndNote in case if you're not aware. So yes, like EndNote, you also have other softwares, and yes, of course, you're free to use that. EndNote is something which is freely available at University of Canberra. That is why I recommend it. And that is something which I have used throughout my career, because whenever I have worked at various universities and hospitals, they always have EndNote. So I have always used that. But yes, you're free to use something else if you find that more convenient. Okay, so yes, as I said, after you screen the abstract and the title, then you do the full text screening. This again is done by two researchers who are blinded. Okay, they do not know what they are screening. They screen their own articles. Then this is entered in the covidence. After full text screening, you may have researcher A saying that these 20 articles should be included. 3 of these should not be included. You will have researcher B saying 25 articles should be included, and say maybe 5 other articles should not be included. So these kind of say disagreements are then solved by a third researcher, and maybe you even have a fourth researcher pitch in. Okay, so yes, as I said, the biggest hint, please do your full text screening against your research question and your eligibility criteria, because a lot of time when you go back to square one, it helps you to gain the larger picture and then look at your article with fresh new eyes. Okay, because sometimes you go so into the nitty-gritty that you forget everything else. Okay, so let not see if that doesn't happen. So it's always good to have your research questions and eligibility criteria in front of you. Okay, then what do you do is, once you have the final numbers, that maybe these are these say 35 articles that we are including in our systematic review, then you develop a Prisma flow chart. Okay, so in a Prisma flow chart, basically, first you say that number of articles you identified via database search. So maybe you had 10 databases that both researcher used, and they ended up with say 100 research articles. Okay, so that is what's written over here. Additional record identified to other sources. Okay, so you may have say subscribed to certain say journals, and they may be giving you additional articles which say were not there in the database at that time. They are very recently published, and you have included that. So any such say variables, outliers are included in this. Okay, then you remove the duplicates, but of course, all right, and then you say how many records were screened. Okay, screen meaning only the abstract and the title. From the abstract and title screening, how many were excluded and what is the reason for the same. Then how many full text screening were done, okay, against the eligibility inclusion criteria, so on and so forth, and how many of full text articles were excluded and the reason for the same. Then finally, how many articles which you're including for your qualitative synthesis, meaning writing and critiquing of a systematic review. And if you choose to do meta-analysis, then how many articles you are including for meta-analysis. Okay, so this is how you develop a Prisma flow chart, and this is a completed example just of one of the examples of how you would be designing a Prisma flow chart. So this is done with every systematic review, and if you're doing one, you would be expected to do the same. All right, then you check for inter-rater agreement. This is not always done, guys, but as best practice, I encourage my students to do this. All right, so basically your inter-rater agreement, which is called Cohen's-Kappa agreement, this is a statistical test which compares the inter-rater agreement between the first and second reviewer. The higher the inter-rater agreement, better it is, okay, meaning it's not that both the junior researcher A and B, they just agree on say 3 articles, and they have 201 articles which they disagree on, and that it shouldn't be included. This indicates that the inclusion exclusion criteria are not developed properly. The researchers are not say able to follow it. Okay, meaning they have not developed the inclusion criteria properly, and therefore they cannot follow it. And that's why there is so much of disagreement. Okay, so generally you would not have so much of disagreement where you have clarity in your inclusion, exclusion, objectives, research questions. All right, so now these are the free 2 calculators which I thought would be helpful for you. So I have included them for you to identify your Cohen's-Kappa's agreement. And I have done one hypothetical example for you using these calculator. So yes, see both of your reviewers, they agree to include 20 articles. So there is no discrepancy in this. Both of them agree to exclude these 5 articles. So there is agreement even in the exclusion of what should not be included. Then only the first researcher A says these 2 articles should be included, whereas the second researcher B says, no, these 3 articles should be included. All right. So then you calculate the Cohen-Kappa's agreement. The agreement is 83.3. This is a moderate level agreement. Okay. So yes, guys. So basically, if you go on the website, all right, you will know the degrees of agreement. So basically, how do I say this is moderate? Is because the website actually gives you the range as to what is called strong agreement, moderate agreement, weak agreement, so on and so forth. Okay, so go on this website and you will get that information. Okay, so it is just like simple, like how we have learned. Stronger the Cohen-Kappa number, if this 0.5 was say 0.9, this is a very, very strong agreement. Okay, so the concept remains the same. All right, okay. All right, so now you have quality criteria checklist. Guys, I will not go into the details of this as much because I have explained in detail what is a quality criteria checklist. I have shown you example of how do you do it. The one which we used widely in the area of nutrition and dietetics is the American Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics quality criteria of checklist. Although this is developed by the ADA, the American Dietetic Association, doesn't mean that other fields cannot use it. But if there is something which you extensively use in your space, you're very free to use that for the assignment purposes. Okay, so the explanation of this has been provided in the video, this week 6 and week 7 tutorial video. Okay, what is a quality criteria checklist and how do you use it? And just for your own FYI, if you're still not sure which one you should be using, then I have made an entire list for you of the various quality criteria checklists which are available. Okay, these quality criteria checklists which are available. So you can look at these ones, or else for nutrition students, you are free to use the American Nutrition and Dietetic Quality Criteria Checklist. But others can review these, use one of these, or you can use your own, which your supervisor would have recommended. Okay, so go as per what is say done in your space. And guys, this is something which I had explained to you. This is say the American Dietetic Association quality criteria checklist. You have a research article over there, and then you finally rate the research article as positive, meaning good quality, negative, bad quality, and neutral, depending upon what is this final score and the agreement, yes, no, unclear, and things. So the detailed example and the justification of this was provided in the assignment video explanation. Okay, so yeah, then you have the next thing, which is assessing the selected articles for quality criteria checklist. All right, so over here, what I'm saying is the bias assessment. Okay, now please appreciate that there are certain tools which will do the quality criteria checklist for you, and they will do the bias assessment for you. And then there are certain tools which are separate for quality criteria and they are separate for bias assessment. Okay, so which one you want to use, which is used in your space, that is for you to investigate. Generally, what I have said for your assignment is you are free to choose this one, this yellow highlight one, and this one has been shown to you in detail in the tutorial video. Basically, if you choose this one, it's a very short and crisp one, which is sufficient for your marking and your scoring because it has very, say, minimal marks for this component as part of your total assignment. So yes, only for assignment purposes, you are free to use the bias assessment tool, which I have given you for your assignment purposes. But for say your real life research projects, I have again compiled a lot of tools which are listed over here, which are your bias assessment tools, which you can use, which you can review, that which is the one you want to use for your research project. Okay, so this sort of say decision making is generally done in consensus with your supervisor. Okay, because you and your supervisor know what is best in your research space and what is the most widely acceptable tool. So that is a decision which you would be making with your supervisor. So happy for you to use the tool which you use in your research. Otherwise, you can stick to the tools which I have suggested for the assignments. Okay. All right. All right, guys. So then the next step is you start summarizing and critiquing your full text research articles which you have selected and finally decided to include as part of your systematic review. So maybe you had these 35 articles and you decided that you and your say team reviewer decided you are going ahead with these 35 articles And now you need to start tabulating them in form of those tables. And these tables are nothing but the tables which you are completing as part of your assignment. Okay, you have these summary tables in your assignment in which you are populating all of the columns, which is your, say, article type, year, author, participant characteristics, IV, DV, outcome, and the critique. Okay, so that is the table which I'm referring to. So basically, step 12 is nothing but taking your full text article and tabulating them in a table format and critiquing them as well. Okay, because this tabulation will help you to understand the research article thoroughly. And this tabulation, as you have seen systematic reviews, you have systematic reviews which have tabulated the research articles which they have selected for the systematic review. So you are following the same protocol. All right, so these tables are therefore important. The raw tables which you have will be much more in detail, but then you will be taking information from this and using it in your publication. Okay, so the tables which you publish as part of your systematic review publication, they are very brief, but it is always good to start with detailed tabulation because this will help you in your systematic review writing as well. Okay, writing of the manuscript. Okay, so now how do you summarize and critique and tabulate is what I have again explained in this video. So this was a very, very intensive, detailed 3.5-hour video, guys, which I have made. So you know every step of your assignment, rather than generally what is done is where the convener gives you the rubric and tells you, okay, good luck and do the assignment. Rather than that, I have made a comprehensive video for you to understand every step of your assignment. And I have kept virtual one-on-one consultation sessions, which I'll be releasing very soon for you to attend. Okay, so we can discuss doubts of your assignment. So honestly, I have provided as much help as I can. Okay, for this, for your assignment purposes. Okay, so now moving on further. So finally, you have the Prisma checklist to see whether you have covered all components of your systematic review. Okay, so right from the title till your synthesis of result. Okay, so this obviously I know it is very, very tiny, but that's why I give you the PowerPoint, that you have the say privilege of just taking this, putting it in a Word document, and then reshaping the size and the shape and the font and whatever you want. Okay, but yes, basically you start with the title till the synthesis of results. Okay, so these are all of the steps which are involved in the writing of a systematic review. And yes, so basically I have covered all of these steps till say your risk or bias of individual studies. Then you actually start writing your systematic review. Okay, meaning you actually start comparing, contrasting studies and things like that. So this, as I said, is an entire different subject in itself, because the actual writing of the systematic review is what the student does as part of a honors degree or research project or a publication for PhD. Okay, so that is not something which I can say push into this lecture or even ask you to do it for your assignment, because it's not fair. Okay, so yes, guys, you have learned all of these steps for you to say synthesize all of your literature, summarize your literature for your systematic review, and then you start writing the results section of your systematic review. Okay, so now the results section is a ball game in itself. Okay, so we are not touching base on this, but this gives you a very detailed overview as to what is it that is needed for you to start, for you to collate your systematic review till you actually write the results and you discuss the results. Okay, so your writing of your results and discussion of results only happens when you have all of this background material ready. Okay, so I have covered the, you're doing the introduction in your assignment. I have done the methodology for you over here as part of your lecture. Now the writing of results and discussion, like any paper, only happens after you have done your introduction, which is in your assignment. You have done the method for your systematic review, and then you go to writing and discussing your results, which cannot be included as part of this unit. Okay. All right. Okay, guys, so this is again another FYI for you, that the Prisma checklist to see whether you have covered all components of writing your systematic review. So I have given you one Prisma checklist. Okay, there are several others such as Consort, Trend, Strobe, etc. So yes, depending upon the type of systematic review you are doing on type of research articles, for example, if you're doing a systematic review only on randomized control trial, then you may choose the consort guidelines to identify if you have met all checklists. Okay, so the best practice for authors is to even submit this as a appendix when they are submitting papers for publication. Then it is up to the say the editor if they want to include this, or they just have seen, yes, you have done a good job, you have followed a evidence-based method, and they decide not to publish it. So it all depends upon the editor of the paper. But yes, generally this is also submitted as an appendix. Okay. So yes, guys, at the end, you write up your manuscript. So as I said, I cannot really cover it in detail, which is the writing of your results and discussing of your results as part of systematic review. But I can just give you a few hints, which will help to say strengthen the quality of writing of your results and your discussion. So when you are writing your results and discussion of your manuscript, please try to focus on these 4 big questions which you need to answer, which is what is the direction of the effect of your IVDV, which you are say synthesizing from the literature. What is the effect size, and what is the effect size we have covered well in our previous lectures. Is the effect size consistent across various studies? Now, this is very, very important, guys. You may only have one study which is showing a strong effect size, not the others. That is not really a very good, overall interpretation of the IV and DV, because you just have one strong study, everybody else has a very weak effect size. Okay, so there is not a strong evidence around that IV and DV relationship. Okay, so you have to examine the consistency of strength across study, and you can actually quantify the consistency of strength across study by doing a meta-analysis. That is why researchers do meta-analysis, because you have a number to say critique the consistency of effect size across study. It is not just say you are looking at it at a face value and saying, yeah, only one had a good effect size, not the others. You can actually quantify this information as part of your meta-analysis. Okay, then you have to discuss the strength of the evidence, okay, meaning the overall strength, as I said, which is in terms of effect size, in terms of say the relationship between say clinical significance and statistical significance. All of this comprehends your strength of the effect size. So these are the hinters and pointers which you can keep in mind when you are writing the results and discussion section of your manuscript. But more than this, it's difficult for me to say, because it's only if you were doing a say a research article with me, a systematic review with me, then it would be say a different approach where I can actually give you further guidance, because we would be working on that topic, we know what the topic is, and then you can have further feedback. Otherwise you can only have general pointers. If I give you anything more specific to this, it may not be applicable in your space, and therefore it may not be fair to mislead you like that. Okay, so yes, guys, do remember at the end, the synthesis of the result is in a narrative form. As I said, where you're writing the result and discussion section, it is say qualitative in nature. Okay, so it is say more of say writing and critiquing the literature. But then a lot of researchers also do a meta-analysis where they are quantifying the results and they are interpreting this in say with more strength. So your numbers gives you an overall effect size that you have computed, and overall strength of the association that you have computed of various study. So now you have more weightage than just the qualitative writing. Your qualitative writing combined with your meta-analysis makes it more stronger. Okay. So guys, again, this is something which we covered in detail when I was teaching you about odds ratio. But just a quick revision that when you do meta-analysis, something which is very commonly reported is something called as a forest plot. All right. And this forest plot, for instance, if you look at this dotted line, that is the line for clinical significance. And as I said, the more close things are to that dotted line, the better it is. Your critique in your say result and discussion section in your writing would be around things like this, which is what is the overall effect size and which study is giving the explaining the maximum variance in the outcome variable, okay, and which has the strongest finding then. All right. So these are the points which you would see, and is the overall finding then significant? So meaning all of these studied together, are they telling the same story, and is the story significant? So therefore you have the p-value. All right, and you have an overall effect size. So guys, yes, it's only if say basically this, how do you undertake a meta-analysis is part of advanced statistics, not something which I can cover over here, but all I can tell you that in writing of a systematic review, you do have an additional component of meta-analysis, which many researchers are now choosing to add because they give you quantifiable interpretation of the narrative, say, critique which you have written. Okay, so yes, in basic epidemiological terms, as part of this unit requirements, all I can say, if possible, do a meta-analysis. If not, systematic reviews are robust in itself, but this is a value-added advantage which you can add to your research. Okay, so yes, guys, now I'll quickly show you the tips which I use for screening full text articles for the very first time. Okay, and this may be helpful for you if you are early career researchers. If not, you don't need to review this because you may already know all of these tips. So let me just share with you. So guys, whatever I'm telling you as part of a PDF document, I have even written it down for you, because having something written down will be easier for you to have, say, a written document in the long run. So I have written down my tips for you. And as I said, guys, this is not really taught, but I felt it is good to share this with the students. Anything which would benefit your learning experience is good to share. Therefore, I'm sharing this with you. So yes, so basically, guys, when I am seeing a research article for the very first time, okay, so I want to basically first see, yeah, the research title, yeah, makes sense. But if I want to see what is the aim of the research article, very quickly, I generally look at the last sentence of the abstract background. Okay, so generally this is the last sentence of the abstract background. Sometimes if the abstract is very small, the main aim is written as the first sentence of your abstract as well. Okay, so generally in the first 3 sentences or so, you have the main aim of the research article already provided to you. If you do not understand that, if you feel this is confusing and you need, say, one more, say, level of, say, confidence around it, then look at the last paragraph of your introduction section. This is the last paragraph of your introduction section. Okay, so when you look at this last paragraph of your introduction section, that is where you have the aim and the objective of the research written in very simple terms. Okay, so the best place to look at the aim and objective of the study generally is, say, the first 2 to 3 lines of your abstract and the last paragraph of your introduction. Okay, now, for example, the most important results, if you look at because you want to do a quick screening, right? The most important results are always reported in the abstract, because these are the results that have been significant or most important in the research, and therefore the researcher is trying to highlight this. Okay, so these are always included in the results section of your abstract. Okay, so you do not need to read the entire results section in your, say, title and abstract screening. Just look at the results in the, say, results section of your abstract, and this is it. If for some reason you find these results very confusing in the abstract, you feel that I still haven't understood, like, means what this person was trying to find or what the person found out, then look at the first paragraph of your discussion. Okay, so let's go to the first paragraph of your discussion over here. So just scrolling, and that's a very big result. Yep. So here you are. So the first paragraph of your discussion section will tell you that this is what our aim were and this is what we found out. Okay, and this is written in very simplistic form without all of the statistical jargon, so it's easier for you to understand. Okay, so yes, this is the second place where you can feel a bit more confident into understanding what the results were, which is the first paragraph of your discussion, where they will say, this is what we found out, X, Y, Z. All right, so this is generally written over here in simplistic format, just in case if you cannot understand the abstract results. All right, then guys, for methodology, generally do not go beyond, for article screening purposes, do not go beyond what is written in your methods. But still, if you're not confident and if you feel that it is still not giving you 100% idea as to this is meeting your inclusion exclusion criteria or not, Then look at, say, the first couple of lines of your methods, in which you will get to know what is the study design. And if this still does not make sense to you, generally the first couple of lines of each paragraph of your methods, they will give you things such as the study type, the participants, the place where the study was done. This is generally there, like, you know, in the top sentences, because when you are writing scientifically and when you are taught scientific writing, you want to have impact statements in the beginning. So therefore, the first couple of sentences in your methods in each paragraph will give you the main idea. And if this is too much for you to read, and if it is time consuming, the other trick which I tell my students is, for instance, to look at table 1. Generally, table 1, it gives you the socio-demographic characteristics of your participants. So you know that the study was done on female. All right, so there were survey numbers and interview numbers. So two way in which data was collected. There were so and so age group, and these were the socio-demographics which were collected. So this gives you a bit more idea and confidence as to who was the study done on, what were the type of socio-demographics, so on and so forth. Okay, because after table 1, generally you have tables which have more bi-directional relationship and multivariate relationships. So your table 1 is generally a good place for you to have a brief overview about the socio-demographic characteristics. Okay, so that is another way of how you can say quickly screen the method section. If you don't understand the abstract, look at a couple of lines in the methods. If that is too much, see the table 1. Generally that includes the baseline socio-demographic characteristics. Okay. And then finally, guys, what did they find out and what is the main take-home message of the research article? That is written in the conclusion of the abstract. Okay, so what is the main take-home message of this study is what is written in the conclusion. And again, if this is confusing, then basically conclusion, guys, is like take-home message in the sense, so how is this applicable in real life? What is the wider purpose of doing this research? How will this benefit health professionals or XYZ, whatever the research is about? Okay, so basically it answers the future direction, the how of the research. Okay, so that is called as the take-home message. Generally, as I said, it is in the last lines of your abstract. If you're not confident about this, and if this is not written well, you think it's confusing for you, then you look at the conclusion section of your paper. Okay, the conclusion section of your paper generally will tell you what is the take-home message in very, very simple terms. Okay, so this is where you have the idea written down a bit more with a fewer more words. Okay, because your abstract are restricted with say 200 or 250 word count. So the researcher may have limited space in expressing the idea, but in the conclusion section, they may clearly tell you this is what is the take-home message from the study. Okay, so that is a good place of quickly reviewing what is the take-home message. So guys, these things, I know they look a lot, but the more practice you get, you become more quicker and more faster with this. And trust me, this at the end will not take you more than 2 to 3 minutes. Okay, so yes, first thing, what researchers would tell you, that yeah, read the title, read the abstract, and that is your article abstract screening process. But a lot of time with early career researchers, the student find it challenging to just read the abstract and to make out whether this is relevant for their systematic review or not. So therefore, I have given you these extra hints where you don't have to read the entire research paper. Look at the last paragraph of your introduction, first paragraph of your discussion, look at the conclusion, look at table 1, and that gives you a good idea about what is this research and whether it is good enough to pass your stage 1 screening. Okay, so yes, guys, I really hope this is helpful for you, because as I said, this is not taught. Okay, but it is good, I feel, to teach students this thing, because it saves a lot of time, energy, and capacity. Okay, once you know these tricks around how to, like, you know, do the research. Okay, yes, guys, so those were the quick tips that I wanted to share with you. And yes, that's about it for this lecture. So this was your week 7 lecture. And as I said, for your tutorial, both week 6 and week 7 tutorial are recorded together because they are an intensive in giving you detailed instructions about your assignment. Why have I done this? So that you have the entire week 8, which is a mid-semester break. So we have no lectures, no tudes next week, week 8, and you have all of that time to say work on your thinking and developing your the final big assignment. Okay, So you would be given, because all of these instructions are covered for you, now you have time and capacity to say start generating ideas and thoughts about your assignment. Now remember, week 9 is when you are having your guest lecture. It's a live guest lecture. It will be happening on Canvas virtual live Blackboard. It will be recorded for those who are not able to attend the live lecture. Okay, so that's going to be your week 9. Week 10 is a public holiday. And before all of this, I'll be releasing the Excel sheet soon, where we'll be having one-to-one consultations. Okay, so when you come for your one-to-one consultation, don't just come with assignment part A. Your consultation time includes all of your doubts which you have for the entire set of your assignment 3. Okay, so that's how we will be designing it, because as I said, we thought that we would be having 40 students for this class, but now we have 100 students for this class. So only one consultation session per students. And of course, I answer all of your queries and everything through discussion boards and through emails, individual emails. So I will endeavor to give you all of the help that I can. All right. So yes, guys, I'll see you later. See you for your next Qts and live lectures. All right.